Welcome back everybody to Hayes Tech and ROM Reviews. My name is Dave Hayes and this is the channel where we talk about pretty much anything tech. Now, I am recording on my CamPark X30 and this is a 4K action camera that you can pick up for about $100. Now the price does go up and down. I think I saw them as low as about $90 and as high as about $129. So right in the same ballpark as the ThiEye I did and the Akaso V50 Pro. So I wanted to see how this one compared to those. So when we get back, we are going to take this camera out and put it through its paces. And as always, if you liked my video, don't forget to hit that like button and share my videos. It really helps me out. And if you're new to the channel and you like what you saw, think about subscribing. And if you subscribe, don't forget to hit that notification bell icon. That way you get a notification of my videos as soon as I release them. Okay, so we are outside right now. It is about 5:30 in the evening, and this is a perfect time to be recording. The sun's low. It's not super bright. And I do have all the settings as far as exposure all automatic. Now I could drop it down to 100 ISO and all that crap, but I'm gonna use this camera the way most people would use it, and that's pretty much all automatic. Secondly, I am using my audio from my Zoom H1 and my Sony lapel mic. It might not be perfect, but it's way better than the audio from this. And here's what it sounds like with the audio through this. Audio test 1 2 3, audio test 1 2 3. So the audio sucks. Now I did look in the instructions to see if I could turn the audio down, and there's no way to turn the audio down because that's what it needs. It needs to turn the audio down. So with that being said, right now I am shooting in 4K 30 frames per second and I have image stabilization turned on. As you can tell, it's not shaking, and believe me guys, I shake like a dog shitting razor blades. So I will put these cameras through their paces as far as image stabilization goes. So I'm a good one for testing for that. So far, I am loving this camera, everything about it. I wish it had the Sony image. That was one thing about that ThiEye that I loved, was the image quality I got out of that. But it was missing just way too many features. This one here reminds me more of like the Akaso V50 Pro, but this one actually has image stabilization in 4K 30, which I'm recording in, and as you can see, image stabilization's on. Also, this has all three fields of view in every single video aspect. So this will shoot in 1080p, it'll shoot up to 120 frames per second. In 720p, it'll shoot up to 240 frames per second, and I think the Akaso does that too. So what we're gonna do real quick is I'm gonna run this through the 4K, 2.7K, and 1080p, and I'm gonna even do 720p and let you guys see what this looks like in all the different fields of view. So let's go ahead and get into that right now. Okay, so first off, we're shooting in 4K, 30 frames per second, and with the image stabilization turned on. Now, when I shoot in 60 frames per second, I lose my image stabilization. So I'm gonna keep all the videos that I'm shooting in 30 frames per second so I have my image stabilization. Now when I do drop down to 1080p, it does have image stabilization in 60 frames per second. So when I do get to 1080p, I will probably record in 60 frames per second. I'm also going to give you guys a slow motion example. So when we hit 1080p and in 720p, I'll show you that. So this is what you can expect out of the CamPark 4K action camera at 4K 30 frames per second. Okay, we are now shooting in 4K 30 frames per second, and we have it in its wide field of view. And if you were vlogging, it would look like this. So just to give you guys an idea, because most people, they will definitely be using this as an action camera, but I know a lot of people who want to start a YouTube channel and they don't have the money to go out and buy, you know, an expensive DSLR. So, you know, this is what they're doing. And, you know, they can't even afford a, you know, like a GoPro, which I highly recommend, by the way. So, you know, what do? Well, you can get about $100 and you can get a camera like this. And believe me, they're well worth it. So let's go ahead and show you what the wide field of view looks like. Okay, we are now shooting in 4K, 30 frames per second, and I do have image stabilization on, but this is its wide field of view. This does not have an extra wide field of view like, say, the GoPro does, or even my Akaso V50 Pro. Also, the Sony had, I think, one setting in 2.7K where it had a really, really wide field of view. So, but this is what you can expect, shooting 4K 30 frames per second with image stabilization on, shooting in its wide field of view. So let's go ahead and drop to 2.7K. So this is 2.7K, 30 frames per second, and this is its narrow setting. Now I had to redo this video because yesterday when I did it, you'll notice the scenes have changed. The skies are cloudy. I ran out of battery yesterday, so I had to reshoot it today. So if things look a little different, I mean, I had to put the same clothes on and everything to make it kind of look. That's the reason why. So this is 2.7K in 30 frames per second, and this is its narrow or vlogging mode. So let's go to medium. Okay, we are now shooting in 2.7K medium view. Just so you guys know, I'm using a tripod today as opposed to hand holding it, because I noticed when I was trying to hold it yesterday that sometimes I would get my finger in the shot, and I just decided I'd go ahead and throw it on the tripod. But I did set this tripod up at exactly how far away I was holding it yesterday, so just so you guys are aware. So this is 2.7K, 30 frames per second, medium field of view. Also, 2.7K does not have 60 frames per second, which is weird, because you do have 60 frames per second in 4K. So just be aware of that, if you do want to do any slow motion in your super high resolution, that you're going to have to go to 4K 60 frames per second. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and jump to 2.7K 30 frames per second and its wide field of view. So we are at 2.7K 30 frames per second, and we are now shooting in its wide field of view. One thing I've noticed about these cheaper action cameras, not the Sony. The Sony is way different, but in both my Akaso and this CamPark, the wide field of view isn't as wide as you would think it is. So when I say wide field of view, it's just a little wider than what I would have with my cell phone. So just keep that, in aware. So, just keep that in mind, because look, right out there, that is its wide shot. I'll go ahead and flip to medium and then flip to narrow and let you see. Okay, that is its medium view, so you guys can see what it looks like in its medium view. And now I'm going to go ahead and switch to the narrow field of view. Okay, that is what it would look like if you were using as an action camera in its narrow field of view. So now you guys get an idea looking through it, like through the eyes of an action camera, okay, as opposed to a vlogging rig. So let's go ahead and switch to 1080p, and I'll show you all the different fields of view in the 1080p. All right, we are now shooting in 1080p, 120 frames per second. Now, this is what you would want to use if you were going to use slow motion. Just remember that when you're shooting at 120 frames per second or even 240 frames per second in 720p, you no longer have image stabilization, so just keep that in mind. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to do a spin, and then I'll slow that down in post. All right, let's go ahead and switch to just 1080p, 60 frames per second. And remember that when you're shooting in 4K and 2.7K, 1080p, your frames per second aren't really gonna matter. I mean, they are. They do make it look weird. If you want more of that cinematic look, you're gonna wanna shoot 30 frames per second. But if you want that more modern look that people are going for nowadays, then shoot in 60 frames per second. Plus, when you shoot in 60 frames per second, you do have that option to slow your video down a little bit if you want to. You know, do a little bit of slow motion stuff. So let's go ahead and switch to 1080p, 60 frames per second, in its widest field of view. Okay, I am now shooting in 1080p, 60 frames per second, but I don't have the image stabilization turned on. This time I have the image distortion correction turned on. So whenever you shoot with an action camera, you know you get that warping effect on the outside edges, well actually all the way through to the center. This gives you the option to get rid of that. But whenever you use that, you can't use your image stabilization anymore, so just keep that in mind. So this is what it would look like if you were using the image distortion correction setting on your action camera at 1080p 60 frames per second. I think I pissed the neighborhood dogs off. Okay, I'm now shooting in 1080p 60 frames per second. I turned off that warping effect mode and I turned image stabilization back on. In my opinion, I don't think this camera really has a really bad warp to it. If you pick up like a GoPro or some of the other ones out on the market, that warp is pretty pronounced. But from what I could tell on this one, I didn't see a lot of that warping on the edges and stuff like that. In my opinion, I think the image stabilization is a lot better than the getting rid of the warp. So this is 1080p, 60 frames per second in its wide field of view. Let's go ahead and switch to the medium. Okay, we are now shooting in 1080p, 60 frames per second. We are in the medium field of view. It's actually called middle, it's not called medium. So you have to kind of get used to that Chinese nomenclature, how they name things and set things up. So I think if I was going to vlog with this, this is probably the setting I would use most. It just seems like the narrow setting on this camera is just a little too narrow. Had to drop off my empty coffee mug. So let's go ahead and switch to 1080p, 60 frames per second, and we're gonna go ahead and switch it in its narrow field of view. Okay, I am now shooting in 1080p, 60 frames per second, and I'm shooting in its narrow field of view. This is the field of view that most people out there use for vlogging with. From what I could tell from editing last night, from the video that I did yesterday, the image quality coming out of this camera is phenomenal for the price. I can't believe it. It's like right up there with GoPro. Cons. I wish this had a super view. This is an action camera. So action cameras, if you remember from the ThiEye, they should at least have one view that is a super view or a really wide field of view. This camera doesn't give you that. But then you have to ask yourself, well, how wide does this camera really need to be an action camera? Is this camera's widest field of view wide enough to do the job that you need it to do as an action camera? So you have to, you kind of have to weigh that out yourself. I'm not going to go through 720p and all of its different settings, but I do want to show you 720p and 240 frames per second. That, of course, is its super slow motion setting. So let's go to that. Okay, I am now shooting in 720p, 240 frames per second. This is going to be a load of information for my laptop to process, but it should be able to do it. This is what you're going to want to use if you want to do any slow motion. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump into a slow motion bit right now. So hopefully I don't fall down, but we're going to go ahead and spin this around. So this is what it looks like under normal speed. As you guys can see, it's really, it should be fine. Now I'm going to go ahead and slow that down, and I'm going to slow it down a lot. What I'll do is I'll slow it down by half at first, and then I'll slow it down as far as I can slow it down and still have it look good, okay? Okay, so let's go ahead and show you what 720p 60 frames per second looks like. and let you guys be your judge as to whether or not you actually want to vlog with this thing in 720p. I am now shooting in 720p, 60 frames per second, and unlike a lot of other GoPro clones out there, this has image stabilization in 720p in all its different fields of view. It's got all the different fields of view, mind you. It's got wide, medium, and narrow. Right now I'm shooting in its wide field of view, and I'm not going to go through each one of those to let you see what that looks like. It's going to look like the other, except it'll be a little grainier on certain TVs. So, you know, a lot of people watch YouTube, they're not watching in 1080p or even 4K. They're watching in 720p or lower, and they're actually not even watching it, they're listening to it. So let's go ahead and put this into 4K 30 and let's finish this video out. Okay, what do I think of this camera? Man, I've got a lot to say and I hope I remember it all. With my stroke brain, it gets a little crazy sometimes. Fields of view. This camera doesn't have really wide field of view, and it should. That if I would have to ding it in one area, it would be that. At least on some of the other cameras I did, like on my ThiEye, it had kind of the same as this, sort of. It definitely had some wider field of view. But at least they gave you that one setting in 2.7K called Super View. This camera should at least give you that, because there are a lot of you out there that are going to use this as an action camera, like action cameras are supposed to be used. And you're going to want that really wide view. So I think they could have given us that, and they didn't. So you have to actually just go with what you got, which of course is narrow, medium, and wide, and its widest settings being, well, what it is. It's just kind of wide. So that's my mailman. By the way, guys, that's my mailman. He is the dude that makes the flies I was telling you about. So, okay, so you got a good idea of how it looked vlogging with this camera, or with the CamPark. So now, hopefully, the information that I gave you should give you some direction to go when purchasing your next action camera. If, of course, you're thinking of the cameras between the Dragon Touch, the Akaso V50 Pro, or the ThiEye, or even this CamPark action cameras. Now, what are my thoughts on it? I think it's a pretty damn nice camera. It's got a couple issues with it that are pretty big issues, and that is, of course, audio. I mean, that's the deal breaker for me. Maybe not for you. Some of you out there might not even care about the audio. Because, you know, I know a lot of people that when they're using it like an action camera, they're shutting that audio off. But if you're going to buy this camera for, say, vlogging or something like that, you're going to want audio. You know, but my recommendation is carry an audio recorder. Even your cell phone will record audio 100% better than this CamPark action camera is going to record. Now, the problem, as I see it, is they do not give you any way to turn down the volume in your audio. And believe me, I went through the instruction manual in that, which they give you a beautiful instruction manual with this. I went through it and I could not find any settings to turn down the volume. It is what it is. You turn it on, it is freaking loud. So, other than that, the only other ding I gave it was its field of view does not get really wide. At least in the other action cameras, they give you this one field of view. I think it's in 2.7K. They might even have it in 4K, but it's what they call Super View, and it's a big, wide view. In this camera, you get those three fields of view in 4K, 2.7, and 1080p, and even 720. They don't skimp on to 720 neither. Oh, great. So, it's not perfect in that aspect. I can recommend purchasing this camera if you have some way of recording your audio externally, okay? But if you don't and you have to rely on the audio on the camera, I am gonna have to tell you guys, pass on this one. Go with the Akaso V50 Pro. I just think that's an outstanding camera, you know, but it is what it is. Okay, I want to thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget, I have that giveaway coming. It is my biggest giveaway yet. I know I gave away a smartwatch and stuff like that, but my wife is making a quilt. You get to pick between the two quilts that she's making. One of them's a winter, one of them's a spring. That's what we're calling them. One's a really deep purplish, and the other is like this light blue kind of look to it, or bob blue actually, which is funny. So we're going to let you pick between those two quilts, and then also I'm going to be giving away my webcam. And again, my stroke brain, I always forget the name of it. But see, okay, but I'll annotate it right up here somewhere. But so make sure you get in on that drawing. Also, those of you that watch my video, giving me a thumbs up or even commenting below, again, helps YouTube's algorithm in pushing my videos out for others to watch it. So again, I would appreciate it if you guys also did that. That's all I have. I want to thank you all for watching, and I will see you on the next one.